Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? Bit later than advertised. Apologies if you were following the first show I've done tonight. That's right, second show. First one tonight was the Fantasy Football Bible, Week 6, Part 1. And I was going through every fantasy relevant player from all the games tonight, Sunday, early slate, and the London game, of course. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that and you're waiting for this one, please do go give that a listen, go give it a watch, go enjoy that one. Flagship show, very lonely tonight. It's just me. I apologize. I said this on the start of the last show, so if you've heard this excuse already, I can only apologize. My job involves me traveling sometimes. Hopefully now that should be it for overnight stays. And sometimes when that happens, you think, oh, it'll be easier in a hotel. And I always have every intention of being in a hotel and recording and doing some bits and pieces, and then work takes over and you have some commitments and some things to do. And it just didn't happen ultimately. So a bit backdated on the content. So first of all, apologies for no waivers this week. Literally just didn't happen. I traveled all day Monday. Just never got the time to do it. And Tuesday literally was working from it's about 6:30 in the morning till about 10 at night. So it didn't happen. So apologies for no waivers. The Bible has dropped. The start sits will be tomorrow. Part 2 of the Bible will drop tomorrow. There'll be a Patreon cast. My rankings are on Patreon, available to everybody. So patreon.com/5 Yard Rush. You can download the rankings that I submitted this afternoon. I will be doing a further update. There's a lot of players. If you'd listened to the show that I've just finished recording, then you'll hear how many players are currently questionable, how many players situation, especially with the Colts. That situation is almost completely in flux at every position. Anyway, enough about that. So this show tonight is going to be talking about some of the news that's happened this week, about the London game, and then we're going to get into some fantasy insights, week 5 review, week 6 preview, and some things you kind of need to know to tune up and get ready for the season, for the week. 35% of the fantasy regular season has gone. It's been and gone. We're almost halfway through the fantasy season. We are 10 days away from being at the midway point of the fantasy football regular season. And at that point, if you haven't got enough wins on the board, your season's starting to wrap up. And so I'll have an opportunity. I'll share with something at the end too. If you're going to be in that situation, don't worry, I've got you covered. We're at the point now where we need to start making some brave decisions. We need to start getting some trades done. If you've got any trades or ideas in the chat, please do feel free to interact with me throughout this recording. If you're watching it live and if you're listening to this, then send them across. I'll try and pick up what I can. But the best way to communicate with me directly and get that advice and me review your rosters and answer all your questions is through our Patreon. You can join for a really, really small amount a month, less than the price of a pint a month. And you get access to me, and you can ask me as many questions as you like. There's absolutely no limit. So Robert Saleh was fired this week. Nathaniel Hackett stayed. Apparently he's not calling plays anymore. I wonder whether he was actually ever calling plays, or I don't understand how you can employ someone to be an offensive coordinator and then not have him call plays, and he's not the head coach. So what is he going to do? Is he just going to pick up the balls in the facility? I genuinely don't know what Nathaniel Hackett is going to be doing. And that is a bit of a concern, I guess. Not that I question that. I know he's been doing much anyway prior to this. So I asked a question on Twitter this week, and I asked it in groups across a multitude of platforms. Got close to a couple of hundred responses. So thank you very much to everybody who got involved with it. By the way, for those of you that were asking, so most of you will know, not all of you will know, I had a separate handle. And then earlier on in the year, I took that handle off for a bit. There was some pretty nasty death threats and awful comments that were sent my way, and so I took it down from a little over a month, and Elon said I couldn't have it back. So that's gone forever. So I used the 5-year rush handle. So I had far more interaction on the Murph _ NFL handle, and there is one back in that handle which I basically got as a placeholder, but the 5-year rush handle is the one I interact on, and which you can see on the screen. You can interact there, but I don't post as much. I really have a bit of a falling out with X as a result of the bitterness and what happened. I'm trying to think of a way to share random thoughts and comments. Well, Patreon is really the best place for it. So do sign up there. But I appreciate some people with money and things, it's quite difficult. So I'm trying to think what I can do to sort of engage with people. Unfortunately, there's so many platforms and so many different areas. But anyway, a couple hundred votes. Nathaniel Hackett got, in all the chats and all the votes combined, got 71% of the vote. The question was, genuinely curious as to everyone's thoughts on this. Who is the worst offensive play caller in the NFL today? 71% was Nathaniel Hackett. 18% was Shane Waldron. 10% Press Taylor. 1% Brian Callahan. I mean, all pretty awful. I was a bit surprised it was that much, probably on the back of the London game. Probably made that a little bit more obvious, I guess, as an answer than others. And look, at the end of the day, it's a really difficult one because Robert Saleh's defense was brilliant, but ultimately the team weren't going in a direction where they were winning games. And as a head coach, that's what you've got to do. Did he? I guess the genuine question was who decided that Aaron Rodgers was the answer to this football team. I was very skeptical when they signed him and traded for him, and then they brought in Nathaniel Hackett. I was even more skeptical of that move. If Robert Saleh was the person that called for both of those, or called for Aaron Rodgers, and then said, "Well, Aaron, you can pick Nathaniel Hackett or whoever you want and delegate the responsibility," then absolutely Robert Saleh should be fired. If he had absolutely no choice over any of those moves, it's really hard to hold him culpable. Because Rodgers is the reason they lost that game on Sunday, and the offense, but mostly Rodgers. The defense did its job. The defense did the job in the game, and so it's really difficult to sit here. I mean, Robert said, and this is the problem when you've got a defensive-minded head coach versus an offensive-minded head coach. Because I think with a defensive-minded head coach, you can do every aspect of the defensive side absolutely perfectly and lose your job. On the offensive side of football, you can do absolutely everything perfectly and keep your job. And I think there is a real disparity between what you're allowed to do on the defensive side and what you can do on the offensive side. Because ultimately, it's about points, and if you score more points than the other team, that's absolutely fine. You could have a team that averages only allowing 16 points a game, finish 4-13 because the offense doesn't move the football, and you're finished. But you could have a defense that allows 30 points and you score 32 points, and all of a sudden everything's okay. Which I guess is down to wins and losses, right? But ultimately, if the offensive play caller says, "Well, hey, listen, we finished, 7-9, and 7-10, I guess. We finished 7-10, but we were fourth in the league in scoring. Oh, great. Okay, so we'll get some defensive players and we'll fix it." And that tends to be the encouragement. It's always seen that it's harder to score points than it is to keep them out. And I'm not necessarily sure in today's day and age that is true. So I'm not trying to make the case to have kept Robert Saleh. Like, I'm not enough of an expert to sit here but I do think there are other jobs that were perhaps a little bit more up in the air than his. But the problem is signing Aaron Rodgers. And when you sign a player like that, expectation levels lift. And when that happens, that you're kind of stuck. So it's a shame. What it means for the Jets is ultimately they're probably not going to make the playoffs again. That offense is shambles. It's going to be shambles for a while. They need to get rid of Rodgers. That's ultimately what they need to do and move on. But they've drafted quarterbacks. It's not worked. They've drafted, offensive line. And I don't think the offensive line is terrible, but it's not as good as it should be. They've traded for wide receivers. They bought in players. Is it culture at this point based on the history of the organization? Who actually knows at this point? I actually don't know why it is, but ultimately bad organizations remain bad for a multitude of reasons. And I don't necessarily think that the firing of Robert Saleh is the there's reports that he was going to fire Nathaniel Hackett. I think that's the move I would have allowed him to have and give him a few more games. But we'll see what happens. We don't really know what happens behind closed doors, and ultimately he was thrown out. He was thrown out by security, if you were to believe reports. And yet, Adam Gase got to say goodbye to the players who nobody liked. And Robert Saleh, who's a very well-respected coach, was not given that opportunity. So it's going to be an interesting game, an interesting time moving forward for them. The game on Sunday was definitely a strange one of the more bizarre London games we've had in quite some time. As speaking of the London games, we do have the London games this week as well. So I talked about in the last podcast all the delays to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and makes me really eerie about what we're going to see from them this week. So the Jacksonville Jaguars aren't actually arriving until tomorrow afternoon because of the delays of Hurricane Milton. And by the way, if you're listening to this from Florida, my thoughts and thoughts go out to all of you. I've got a lot of connections in Florida. I've got a lot of personal connections in Florida. We lived in Florida. So, I've been watching the news, and I've been on the phone and speaking to as many people as I can, and texting and messaging people. And I'm really hopeful that everyone is okay. And thoughts and prayers go out to everybody in Florida right now. Everything dealing with Hurricane Milton, and that is affecting this London game. And the Jacksonville Jaguars are not going to get here till Friday late morning, early afternoon. Then they're going to do a practice. That's going to be really difficult for them. And then after that, they're going to, not really do much of a practice on Saturday. So you've got this really interesting case where they're not going to be as ready as they normally are. Normally come over on Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. They're going to be a few days delayed as a result of the hurricane. It's going to upset their preparation. They probably haven't been able to practice all that much over stateside because of the hurricane either. They're going to be severely undercooked coming into this game on Sunday. And that's going to be a real difficult. It's going to disrupt their preparations, disrupt what they normally do. It's going to make it very difficult for them. So I think you've got a team that will struggle on Sunday. It will be the Jacksonville Jaguars because their preparation has been completely dismantled here as a result of this hurricane. And I think it's going to lead to the comfortable victory of the Chicago Bears. That's how I see the game. I will be there. I'm hoping to get down there quite early. I'd love to interact and see each and every one of you. Anyone that wants to meet up, drop me a message on X or however you've got contact details with me. Let me know you're going to be there. I'd love to meet up and try and meet up with each and every one of you. Have a picture, have a chat, do whatever it is that you want to do. It'd be great. I just love meeting everybody and just chatting as much as I can. Right, we're going to do a bit of a week 6 review and thought process. So, or week 5 review, I should say. A week 6 thought process. So let's start with week 5. Let's start with the thoughts of trends and things to keep an eye on. There's some things I think I'm going to talk about, some peripheral players and players definitely to look at going forward for the season. Because I think, for me, what I want to try and do in this segment is try and think of players who are undervalued, or players who are potentially not being looked at right now, who could be putting in significant points going forward, and you can try and capture them now. So I'm going to give you some thoughts and processes here on some players. We'll start with Jalen Tolbert. Brandon Cooks is on IR. He had a season best in percentage of routes run, targets, air yards, receptions, and receiving yards. Jalen Tolbert's pretty much going to finish Brandon Cooks here in Dallas. So if he's available in your leagues, you should be picking him up. He's going to be a flex-worthy play most weeks, especially over the next 4 weeks. So I would definitely be picking him up if you haven't already. If you need a flex-worthy play, especially with the amount of injuries, he's one that's definitely worth looking at. One I would start getting a look at as well is Jalen Polk. His routes have gone up to, he's running routes on 95% of snaps, which is huge. And now you've got Drake May coming in. it could be trending towards Jalen Polk having a bit more of a role. So not necessarily saying it's going to be hugely fantasy relevant at this stage, but he's one I'd definitely be keeping an eye out. And then I think, looking at Jalen Polk, someone's got to usurp out of this office at some point, and a change of QB is a pretty good way of doing it. So Jalen Polk is the guy I would be having a look at and looking at him quite significantly. If you're looking for a desperation play this week, Jalen Coker, if there's an injury to Xavier Legette, he looks like he's going to be the stand-in and not Jonathan Mingo, so he can be dropped from your team. He caught 4 for 68, so Jalen Coker is a player I would definitely be looking at. Brian Thomas is continuing to cook 30% targets per route run. He's definitely the number one receiver on this team. He actually comes into a matchup this week that isn't favorable for most, but with his skill set and speed is a massive favorite for him. But 8 targets on Sunday, he's going to have a really, really good game on Sunday, I'm sure, coming up. We're looking at Rico Dowdle. 50% of snaps last week, but a lot of touches, 22 touches and 114 yards. That role's going to get bigger. Rico Dowdle now is Zeke Elliott can go. He can be dropped from leagues. You're really starting to see him step up and get into that role. He will be sort of a mid-range RB2 going forward most weeks. Let's talk about Tyrone Tracy. He stepped in last week, 63% of snaps. Huge rushing yards over expected. Next Gen Stats had him close to 50. I think it was 47, if I remember rightly. So he's going to have a decent role behind Devin Singletary. Speaking of some of these roles elevated, Ronnie Rivers is gone. Blake Corum has taken that second running back role. It's not important because it's not for fantasy, but if you were sitting there thinking about who was going to be the next wide receiver or the next running back, the handcuff to own behind Kyron Williams, it was always going to be Blake Corum, but now officially Ronnie Rivers is kind of finished. We don't need to worry about him anymore in fantasy football land. Darnell Mooney continues to see a huge increase role. He absolutely torched the Buccaneers last week on Thursday Night Football, but that role's getting bigger. You should definitely be looking at trying to get some shares of him. T. Higgins is starting to come out now. Things going really well for him. Zay Flowers, 32% targets per route run last week, which is huge. 12 targets, 141 air yards. Obviously, a lot of that was in a massive shootout, but the 32% targets per route run is huge, and that's a signal to what he can do. And we start seeing that volume. He'll be a high-end wide receiver too for the rest of the year. Brandon Ayuk finally saw a decent game from him. 35% targets per route run. A huge amount of air yards as well. We're starting to see him trend in the right direction now and finally get going after what was a terrible start due to him sitting out. We've started to see 100 plus total yards in the last 3 weeks for Terry McLaurin. He is definitely a wide receiver too moving forward. Tucker Kraft continues to just be awesome. Isaiah Likely is still the lead tight end over Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews isn't even getting 50% of snaps now or 50% routes per drop back. So Mark Andrews is pretty much like untouchable in any format of fantasy football right now. He's the number one blocker in fantasy in tight ends right now. Number one blocking tight end in football right now. So there you go. Raheem Mostert looked like he's got the role right now when Devon Achane is out, 56% of snaps, good amount of touches. Jalen White, though, looked more efficient. I think Mostert's window is the next 4 weeks, and then that will kind of be it for him. Ty Chandler. So if Aaron Jones misses past the bye week, which is this week, Ty Chandler played 63% of snaps. Myles Gaskin played 7. Tells you everything you need to know. Chandler is effectively the guy and will get a big role if Aaron Jones is out. So that's a big one to keep an eye on for the rest. Or well, if we get some injuries, we'll see what happens. But that's one to definitely keep an eye on. Moving forward, Xavier Hutchinson came in. He took a good amount of Nico Collins's role, so I expect him to potentially fill some of it this week. But I am cautious with my ranking. If you heard it last week, so just be a little bit careful of that. Where are we at? There's a lot of things on Bigsby, and a lot of people are trying to buy in on Tank Bigsby. And I think the train's left the station a little bit, and then I started actually looking at the tape a little bit more and looking at the I'm looking at the behind the scenes of his numbers, and actually it's just Tank Bigsby broke a few runs and then actually was largely inefficient throughout. I actually think that Travis Etienne is going to hold the role. This week, I kind of have them cannibalizing each other. But I actually, I initially sort of shot the hip and said that, Tank Bigsby, the train's left the station. I actually don't think it has. I think it will go back to Etienne. I think Travis Etienne is going to hold on to that role. I actually think you could probably buy Travis Etienne quite cheaply. So if I was struggling, I'd actually go out there, given what he did last year, what he's done in the history, I'd actually go out there and start trying to acquire Travis Etienne because I think you can get him for pennies on the pound. And I think second half of the season, he's really going to take off. The Ramondre Stevenson benching wasn't a benching. So he was benched at the start, and then he actually got a lot more touches than Antonio Gibson. It was 16-7, which is stupid. Like, they made this big public thing of they're going to bench Ramondre Stevenson and then gave him the majority of the role. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's just stupid. That's the Patriots for you. They always say one thing and do something else, which is really irritating. Darius Slayton was an absolute monster without Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors, notifications come up. Still not seen in practice today. They play Sunday Night Football. If Darius Slayton's on your waiver wire, you absolutely need to pick him up. So just keep an eye on that one. David Njoku returned and then picked up an knee injury. That's really frustrating. So he is a real issue. Garrett Wilson, 4.6 yards per target, which is absolutely stupid, given the fact he had like 23 or so targets. I just think it's really bad. If the Jets go and get Devontae Adams, like, Garrett Wilson's probably droppable. Like, it's that bad. The Breece Hall thing's weird. I don't know why he's not getting more work. The fact he's probably only missed one, the fact he's only forced one missed tackle in 4 games probably is a bit of that. It's one to definitely keep an eye on. I am a bit concerned about that because of the fact that you've got this situation where Breece Hall, quote unquote, doesn't look good. I'm still struggling to get my head around it. Like, he doesn't look good, but the whole offense doesn't look good. The offensive line hasn't created holes. He's an absolute talent machine. Like, you should be getting him the ball more. The Jets clearly, maybe with a change, maybe they do something a bit different, and maybe the ball just goes back to Breece Hall. Because when they gave the ball to Breece Hall almost exclusively last year, they won football games. So there you go. One last thing is the Zach Moss versus Chase Brown thing. Chase Brown's the guy now. Like, Zach Moss, he played more. Well, great. He got a lot of the donkey work. Good luck to him. Chase Brown is getting all the important work. He gets all the green zone touches. He gets all the high value touches. He's got absolutely everything. So just ignore the noise on Zach Moss. He's just nothing. It doesn't necessarily matter. So then one thing I'd start to say when we're looking at this is there was some really good data shared by Sam Hoppen, right, where he tracks his like high value touches for fantasy pros, right? And so what he did is he actually tracked this, but he took out like the week one numbers, where teams were very different in week one to where they are now. And when you take those numbers out, people like Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, Zeke Elliott, Raheem Mostert, Zamir White, all these players start to really like fall off a cliff when it comes to high value touches per game. So right now, the player based on weeks 2 to 5 with the highest number of high value touches per game, but he also has the highest percentage of his team's total high value touches is Kenneth Walker. Then Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara. They're like the big five. Then you got Saquon, Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, and then weirdly Javonte Williams, which is a big surprise, and Devon Achane. Then you got Montgomery, Hall, Etienne. This is why Etienne again. So we're looking at the case of Etienne over Bigsby. Bigsby is getting less than 2 high value touches per game. Travis Etienne is getting 5 high value touches a game. You know, these are where the stories are told. So I just thought that was really interesting. I thought I'd share that as part of this. And then as for the high value touches, surprisingly, the Titans are in second with the Broncos, which just bothers me that they're that high. And then you've got that the Lions well out in front of the number of high value touches per game. So yeah, really, really interesting numbers. I just can't believe Javonte Williams' numbers shoot up so madly when you take out his really bad week one. So it seems like there's some players when you take out the week one average, when you stream the rest of the season, look really good. So it's a really interesting piece that Javonte Williams is kind of being capped back because he was terrible in week one. And some players look brilliant in week one that don't look so good now. So it was really interesting to see that. So I thought I'd just share a little bit of insight there on that one. Right. One thing I'd say, I was looking at some regression numbers the other day, and there's a couple of players who I actually think are going to see some interesting positive regression fantasy numbers. One is George Pickens, right? So George Pickens has yet to score a touchdown, and he's in the top 5 in red zone targets. He's in the top 6 of end zone targets, and he's in the top 10 for receiving yards, which is just absolutely mental. He's also had over 20 points that have been nullified by penalty. So he's heavily penalized, and then he's losing all these fantasy points due to penalty, which is really interesting. So expect George Pickens to positively regress. Expect DJ Moore to positively regress. He is getting more and more work, and he's getting a better catch rate now that Caleb Williams is continuing to progress. So we're starting to see some positive regression for DJ Moore. We saw it this week, and that's only going to increase more and more as we get on. So just keep an eye on those ones. If I'm worried about a particular player potentially regressing, it's Chris Godwin. So I think I talked about this on the Patreon cast, or I talked about it somewhere, about his expected fantasy points per game versus his actual fantasy points per game. And his actual fantasy points per game are significantly more. And that is because of it's simply because of the amount of volume he's getting in that offense. So I think I would look at this. He was like ranked 25th in expected fantasy points per game, but he's actually ranking in the top 6, 7 of fantasy points per game. And so normally when you see those two, they tend to coincide. I think there'll be a slight regression. I don't think he regresses all the way back. I still think he's a wide receiver 1 for the rest of the season. And I've been on that train for a long time. So I still stand by that, but just expect some numbers. If you've noticed the last 2 weeks, they've sort of curved slightly, and that's kind of where I expect it to be moving forward. The last thing I'll do, and then I'll start to wrap this up, is I talk about the cornerback wide receiver matches, and I put the links into the shows. And I'll put this on when I drop them on the podcast tomorrow. on the podcast feed. Advantageous wide receiver matchups every week. So the big one for me this week is Jaden Reed versus Kytrell Clark. Reed has got a huge matchup. Kytrell Clark is giving up the most fantasy points per route run to any cornerback that's playing in week 6. He's also being targeted on 25% of routes against him. And Reed has got the highest fantasy points per route run of any wide receiver playing this week. So that matchup is just guaranteed points. I really like T. Higgins against Deonte Banks this week. Really, really good. He's also a really, really good player in Higgins this season in man coverage. So he gets targeted 32% of the time when running routes in man coverage, and he's 10th in targets per route run in man coverage, and he's also 14th in win rate, and he's had some really difficult matchups, i.e., against the Ravens. So whilst the Giants don't line up in man coverage all that often, it's actually only about 28% of the time. When they will, the ball will go to T. Higgins, and it will be a real advantage. So look forward to that one. And then another one as well, DJ Moore on Sunday against Montario Brown. That should be a really good one. He's playing a high propensity of snaps. Montario Brown is allowing a large amount of fantasy points per route run against him. It just screams points. Other matchups I really like: Malik Neighbors, obviously, against Cam Taker-Britt. Dontavian Wicks against Sean Murphy-Bunting, Brian Thomas against Jalen Johnson, despite how good Jalen Johnson's been all season and how much I've talked about him being so great. Brian Thomas's pace is real. Jalen Johnson struggles against pace. Lad McGonkey against Jaquan McMillan, and then also Rashid Shaheed against Jamal Dean. I can see if Spencer Rattler can get vertical and beat Dean, then Shaheed will go to the house. I do think Amon-Ra St. Brown has a difficult matchup this week against Jordan Lewis of Dallas, especially in the slot, but I still think that there's plenty of volume there for Amon-Ra St. Brown to be a bottom end wide receiver 1. Mike Evans on Marshawn Lattimore is definitely going to be box office, and you want to buy tickets to that one. It could be one of 3 outcomes. Mike Evans could be a wide receiver 1, because these two genuinely hate each other. He could be the overall wide receiver 1. He could fall into like absolute obscurity, and he could finish wide receiver 100, or he could get ejected. And really, any of those outcomes are possible this week with Mike Evans. So, it's really going to come down to who holds their nerve the most against that, because those two genuinely despise each other and everything they're about. And then Garrett Wilson against Rasul Douglas. You've got the jet lag coming back from London. They've lost their coach all this tumultuous week, and then you've got Rasul Douglas has been an excellent corner this week. So I absolutely just see Garrett Wilson falling a little bit away this week. I also don't like JSN's matchup against Illinois. Alec Pierce against Jarvis Brownlee is going to be a tricky one. Quentin Johnston against Pat Satan be really tricky. Tank Dell on Christian Gonzalez would be tricky. And Khalil Shakir, who actually currently isn't practicing up against Michael Carter, could be really tricky as well. Keep an eye on all of those matchups. I'm not saying all of them are must-sits, but you just need to keep an eye on each and every one of those. I think I'm just seeing if there's anything else I want to cover off going into this week. I guess for me right now, let's talk about some buy lows and sell highs. It's my other part of my notes. I was just looking through and seeing. So I'm looking at players, and I'm thinking if I've got a team that's only got 2 wins or less, I'm thinking of players I want to try and acquire right now. The players I want to be quite aggressive on with players like Tyreek Hill, Breece Hall, Devon A-Chan, even Anthony Richardson is someone I'd be looking to buy low on. David Montgomery, Nico Collins with the IR could be really interesting if you've got a spot here and you're someone who is like 5-0 or 4-1. There's some players that absolutely be looking to buy right now. So look, the way I kind of put these forward, okay? So like Tyreek Hill, it's not going to be that long before Tua comes back, or if he doesn't come back, then they will bring in somebody else. And either way, they're not going to stick with Tyler Huntley at quarterback for the rest of the season. It's absolutely not going to happen. So if you're sitting there with like 1 win, 2 wins, I actually really love buying in for Tyreek, and it'd be really hard because you have to swallow one or two more losses. But then actually, I think you could get him really, really cheap. So I think right now you could probably get him for Garrett Wilson or even Drake London. And I'm sitting there thinking I'd be all part of that deal to try and get those players because I don't think they're going to give you great numbers now. And then what you're also doing is buying the buy now, which if you do that, or even if you wait until next week and then you get the buy out of the way, you're almost buying an extra week's production. So that's another way you can look at it. So I'm all in on buying someone like Tyreek Hill if you can. It's only going to get better for him, right? If you can get rid of someone like a Chuba Hubbard or Jordan Mason for Brees Hall, I'm absolutely all in on this move. Listen, we both know that the shelf life on those players is very limited. Chuba Hubbard, the window's going to open on Jonathan Brooks. You got Chuba Hubbard maybe getting 3 more weeks left at absolute best. And then you're looking at that and thinking, right, I'm going to buy in and get someone who's going to be off my roster in 3 weeks for Brees Hall, who I get it right now is not in a good spot, but they've just fired their coach. Everything has to change. He hasn't had many rushing attempts over the last couple of weeks. It's less than 20. But they know that their best player on that offense is not Aaron Rodgers, it's Brees Hall. And they're going to have to go and get him going again. When they were really bad last season and needed to win games, Brees Hall was being targeted left, right, and center. He wasn't necessarily running the ball loads, but he was getting a shed ton of targets. And I think they're just going to go back to that because I think that they're lacking any kind of imagination. It's the best thing that they can do. So I sit here and think, okay, I've got Jordan Mason, or I've got Chuba Hubbard. I would sit there, or if you've got a wide receiver and they need a wide receiver, then maybe you go after that for Brees Hall. I'll be buying him low everywhere I can right now. I think it's a really, really good stretch. I would be looking at someone like Devon Achane. Could be a really interesting person to pick up. Look at how good he was in the first 2 games of the season. He was RB3 and RB2. Right now they got the bye, so you can sit here and eat. You're going to have to eat a couple of weeks, probably 2 weeks. There's some, so even 3 before we know what happens. But I think by week 9, you're going to know if it's Tua or if it's going to be another quarterback. And I think they're not going to wait that much longer. So I sit there and think, okay, I want to go and get Devon Achane. Again, you could do the same thing. You can cough up Jordan Mason, Chuba Hubbard right now, and I think you'd probably get Devon Achane. Maybe it takes a little bit more, but I'd be putting some feelers out like that. Anthony Richardson. So he's been really poor, but actually he's been running the ball a lot with his legs. And I think I'm looking at Anthony Richardson. I'm thinking he's going to be back at some point. I would be sitting there trying to acquire Anthony Richardson because the ceiling is literally ridiculous. And it's an absolute gamble play. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, this is definitely going to work out like Tua or like Tyreek Hill or Devon Achane. Like, and you can see a clear pathway. The truth is, it's an absolute hope and prayer. But if you're sitting there with Trevor Lawrence on your bench right now, or you're sitting there with someone of a similar standard, and you're thinking like, why am I even holding Trevor Lawrence? He's not going to do anything for me. I know what I'm getting. But the other player might be sitting there thinking with Anthony Richardson, oh, he's close to droppable. I'd be firing up Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert for Anthony Richardson in a redraft league right now. Because Anthony Richardson will outperform both those players most weeks just with what he does on the ground. But the ceiling is the moon. So absolutely cough up on each of those players and make that work. I really like also potentially buying David Montgomery. So David Montgomery is probably a bit harder to do. But if you can sit there and get, say, someone like James Conner off the books for David Montgomery, I would absolutely be doing that. I actually think in terms of David Montgomery, who's averaging 18 fantasy points, because the fact he's doing it so quietly, it's kind of under the radar. Everyone sits there and thinks, oh, yeah, it's just going to be Jameer Gibbs and Jameer Gibbs and Jameer Gibbs. And actually, David Montgomery is far more consistent. You can take his production to the bank. He's going to get you 15 to 18 points a week. He's scored 18 points in every game so far this season. He's had his bye, so you're buying an extra week. I would sit there, and if I could cough up James Conner for David Montgomery, I'm absolutely doing it every day of the week and twice on Sundays. I'd even consider someone like Josh Jacobs for David Montgomery. I would absolutely be doing that one as well. And then the Nico Collins thing, right? So if Nico Collins, the person's got him on IR and is cacking it, right? And you're sitting there thinking like, well, okay, he's going to be out for 4 weeks. Now, if you're 5-0 and you've got some commodity, you've got some players on your bench who you could absolutely fire over for Nico Collins, you should absolutely. If you've got a team that is really struggling in a league, who is 1-4, 2-3, and they've got Nico Collins, and they think, right, I've just lost my best player. What's my season doing? Offer them a package to get their season back up and running and take Nico Collins off their hands. Absolutely do it. It'll be the best place, the best deal you can do. He'll be out 4 weeks. Yes, it's going to be tough. He'll still have a bye week in week 14, so you're going to miss 5 weeks of the fantasy season, likely, the regular season. However, he's got a really good fantasy schedule in the playoffs, and if you can get him, and you're already at like 4 or 5 wins, and you can eke 4 or 5 more, you're going to be an absolute stud in the playoffs. So keep an eye on that one. If I'm looking at players I'm absolutely trying to get rid of right now, Garrett Wilson, I don't know. Like for me, because he had such a big week, and you can absolutely look at that and go, oh, look, you can get rid of Garrett Wilson. If I could sell him for almost anything right now, I absolutely would. Because Garrett Wilson is either going to be worth absolutely nothing if Devontae Adams goes there, or he's going to be worth next to nothing because the ball's going to go completely to Breece Hall. Either way, I'm trying to get out of the Garrett Wilson business. If you can buy Brian Thomas, that's the sort of player, I think I'd be doing that trade every day of the week, twice on Sundays, because Brian Thomas is going to be the number 1 receiver in Jacksonville. I'd be looking at players like, just going through my list now. Tank Bigsby's one I'd offload. I've just talked about it. People will be looking at Tank Bigsby right now thinking like, oh my God, he's going to be so good. Like he's going to overtake the role. I thought that. Like I suckered into it when I looked at him on Sunday. And then I rewatched the tape and I was, okay, so he did it on like 3 plays. And the rest of the time, he's pretty garbage. So actually, when you look at that, I think, okay. I actually think that Tank Bigsby is going to go up in smoke. I also think they're going to fire Doug Pederson pretty soon. I think if he loses the next 2 games in London, I think Doug Pederson's going to be fired. And then I think if he's fired, well, then they're not going to roll out Bigsby, because the new coach is going to have to come in and try and do something, whether he's playing for his job or he's playing for something else. They're just going to fire the ball the best players. It's what happens. So I'd be getting rid of Bigsby. If you can get something for Bigsby, I tell you what, try and swap Bigsby for Breece Hall and see if anyone bites. You could do that. That'd be an absolutely ledge move. I saw one of my Patreons, Stevie. He traded Tank Bigsby for Bijan Robinson. I was like, I should almost veto that trade, but I can't in good conscience. What a deal that is. I'd be looking to do that. If you can get and I don't really want to go out and buy lots of Bijan, but for Tank Bigsby, I would absolutely do it. I mean, if you can try and get out of the Christian Kirk business, that's going to be really difficult. Do you know Christian Kirk only played 53% of the snaps last week, ran reads for 53% of the snaps. Like, that is absolutely tragic. The other one I'd be trying to get rid of is Justin Fields. Like, he's currently like a bottom end quarterback 1, and he's been crap. Like, the other players will get better. He'll be usurped. I'd be getting rid of Justin Fields and try and get some pieces for that. There'd be definitely players I'd be trying to go and deal for. Right. There's some thoughts and processes to help you get through the week. Starts and sits will be tomorrow. Part 2 of the Fantasy Football Bible for week 6 will be tomorrow. As I teased at the start, if you're heading in the direction that your fantasy season is going to be almost over by mid-October, don't you worry, because I'm launching as of tomorrow the 5-Yard Rush mid-season elimination league. It runs like a guillotine. We'll be drafting. You can draft a brand new team. We'll be looking to draft in week 7 onwards, or week 8 onwards, sorry. Depends how quickly we fill these leagues. Maybe it will be week 7 if we fill it out. So keep an eye on the Twitter at 5 Yard Rush. I will put a link into the shows that will go out tomorrow. So that'll be the Fantasy Bible Part 2 and also the Starts and Sits. So keep an eye on those. They'll be all out to you tomorrow. That's going to do it for the show. I've been streaming for about an hour and 45 minutes, so my voice is pretty tired. It's been just me. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really appreciate each and every one of you. Appreciate the feedback. Hope to see as many of you as possible on Sunday. And don't forget, Rush Nation, as always, keep rushing.